Hi, can you hear me okay? Let me know if you can hear me. Thank you. Hello. Great. Nice. This is my steampunk outfit. I'm actually dressed like my main character, whose name is Lore. Hello. Let a few more people trickle in and then I'll start. Okay, I'll start. So thank you. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming to the book launch party for the Vitruvian Heir, Book 1, The Unraveling. I am super excited to be pushing this revised and expanded version out into the world. It's really the 5th anniversary of the book, so I wanted to go in and change a few things. And I'm also very pleased to announce that it is going to be a trilogy. So books 2 and 3 are underway, and that was something that I'd always intended, but I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do it, but I'm doing it. So it's happening. It's really exciting. And you can order this book now on Amazon in print and Kindle. I will put the link in the comments and in the discussion of the event after. But you can go and purchase it. Just look up Ellis Kilroy or the title, but I'll put the links so that you can. So why a launch party? Well, first, of course, to celebrate. But second, as an indie author, I don't have that big publisher backing. So it really helps if a bunch of people go and buy the book at the same time. It lifts my rank on Amazon, so then more people will see the book in searches. Anything like that really helps an indie author. Also, leaving reviews really helps us. And of course, word of mouth is the most powerful thing. So if you read the book and you like it, please tell all your friends about it. So how things will go today, I have a little bit of an agenda. So we'll have an intro, which I'm a little ways through right now. We'll do a toast to celebrate the book. I'm making a signature drink called a winged escadrille, named after the group of underground debutantes in my book. I will tell you what's new in this latest version. And then I will do a reading. I'll read the prologue. That's usually what I read when I do a reading. And I think it really captures, the world and the main characters really well. And then I'll go over rules for the costume contest if you are participating, and I will show the prizes again. And after that, I will open up for Q&A. All right. So, who will like this book? I feel like I'm going to be futzing with my hat the whole time, but that's okay. Who will like this book? This book really is, a friend once described it as like Downton Abbey and the Hunger Games had a vulgar baby. And I would say that's pretty accurate. It is set in the year 2282 in a nightmarish future version of the U.S. where, women have slowly lost their rights. The poor are completely disenfranchised, and there's an elite ruling class. I swear it's fiction and it's in the future. A dictatorial monarchy has come into power, and one of the past emperors mandated that society return to Victorian and Edwardian times to kind of reclaim pristine values of the past. Our main character is Lorelei Featherston. She's a daughter of the aristocracy. She's she's rebellious, but she's measured, and she has a forbidden talent of writing, which in this world women are not allowed to be writers, not allowed to be published. And she also, upon the death of her reclusive grandmother, she inherits a legacy that could set her free. But running from her fiance, her childhood confidant, her wedding to him, his name's Gideon, it may be a risk that's not worth taking. She also is grappling with feelings for their mutual best friend Fallon, who is the brooding ward of the current emperor and the heir to the Vitruvian throne. And she's finding it increasingly difficult to resist his melancholy charms. And so the question is, will she escape to carve out a new life, or will she accept her role as a dutiful wife? And in the bordering nation of Hopespoke, women are free, and legend has it that this enigmatic and mysterious woman runs an underground group of girls and is secretly wielding a lot of power. And so this book is really about what happens when their worlds collide. So, let's see what people are saying. I can't really read it. You know, I knew this hat was going to be a problem, but I have to keep it on, because if I take it off, my hair is just going to be a disaster. Vulgar babies, yes. All right. And so how did this story come to be? Well, it's actually it's an interesting story. So the seed of this kind of fell into my head when I was a sophomore in high school, which I'm a very, very far from that right now. And it was in history class, and I wasn't really a good student of history. I was sort of like, if it wasn't English class or art class or theater, I was sort of just kind of checked out and skating by and daydreaming. But this one day in class, thank goodness I was paying attention, and our teacher was talking about the time when Catherine de' Medici ruled the French court, and how she had this group of girls. They appeared to be her ladies-in-waiting, but they were really spies. They were called l'Escadron Volant, or the Flying Squadron, and they would seduce all the men in court, find out their secrets, and report them back to Catherine, and that's how she wielded a lot of her influence. And she also was very famous as well for throwing like lavish spectacles, like productions and plays with elaborate sets, and all kinds of athletic tournaments, anything to keep her court diverted and kind of prevent mutiny. So all this was very fascinating to young me. And of course back then I was also, and still am, a hopeless nerd, and I was obsessed with, the Victorian period, all the Dickens novels, anything by the Bronte sisters. I was all into Wuthering Heights and that. So I started imagining this story. I said, what if there was a future version of the U.S. where an emperor had come into power and he mandated that everything be returned to Victorian times? And, what if there was a woman and she was running this underground group of girls? And what if she was planning a coup? And what if she sent her best girl in to seduce the emperor himself? But then the girl fell in love with him. And that was, of course, my 15-year-old sensibility. And, of course, that changed in this version. So what happened was basically that, I wrote a few pages of it, but as most of my amateur writings, it sort of fizzled and I forgot about it. And then back in kind of 2013, 2014, I just started noticing there was a lot of resurfacing dialogue about women's reproductive rights. And I noticed a lot of states were trying to pass really very kind of repressive legislation around that. And so this idea kind of fell back into my head, and I started writing the book and the version of it that it is now. And what it really became is a story about the dangers and the very real threat of societal regression. So, I need a drink. I hope you do too. Let's have the toast right now. I am making a signature drink. I have my little glass right here. I'm calling this drink the Winged Escadrille after the group of girls in my book. And I'm using 1 part absinthe, which is like a licorice liqueur, and I'm using 2 parts champagne. Well, I'm using Prosecco, but that's okay. You can use whatever you like as long as it's sparkling. And the twist on this is that I don't know if you can see, I added some Luxardo cherry syrup and a cherry. Without the cherry syrup and the cherry, this is really a drink that's called a death in the afternoon. And this was a drink created actually by Hemingway during his time in Paris, living on the left bank. Can we get your books autographed by you? If you're ordering them on Amazon, no, just because it's print on demand. But if you know me personally, I can send you a signed copy if that's what you would like. Okay, so here, let me make this. Here's the absinthe. So 1 part absinthe, so I'll count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I have my little, of course it fell on the floor because I'm wearing gloves and can't do anything. My little La Marca Prosecco. All right, that is enough. All right, cheers everyone. Thanks for coming. Ooh, strong. Gotta sip that. All right, so now I'm going to tell you what's new in this version before I start doing a reading. So the last go-round, I published this in 2015, and people said they wanted more of certain characters. So characters like Sawyer, who's Laura's wild child of a best friend, Avery, who's a love interest later in the book, and so I complied with that. People said they wanted the ending to be a bit more drawn out, so I expanded it. Now it's sort of become what I would call, I don't know, a patriarchal bloodbath. That's how I would describe it. And what else? So I also even created a new character named Cousin Alistair, and he is going to play a more prominent role in the 2nd and 3rd books. In addition to that, I added book club questions in the back, and I had this amazing artist. She's called Lilith Soar. She's from Paraguay, and I had her do the illustrations. I have new character illustrations. There's 6 of them, and I'll show you this one. Although if you buy the Kindle version, there's only 3 that separate the parts of the book, but if you buy the print version, there's 6, and they're just beautiful. And there's also a sneak peek in the back of book 2, The Awakening. And the final thing, I guess, this book has been painstakingly proofread by my editor, who I just recently got myself an editor because I wanted a pair of professional, I'm a writer by profession and by passion, and I do have friends read the book, but I really, on this version, wanted a professional's eyes, so I found her on Readsy. Her name's Jennifer Rees, and she's actually the editor for the Hunger Games series, so I'm feeling pretty good about the state of the book since she has looked at it. And now I'm going to read the prologue for you. It's about 5 pages. I'll read slowly. Hopefully you don't get bored. I guess if you do, that's a bad sign. But hopefully not. And this really shows, I think, an introduction to the world itself, which is, of course, it's a steampunk book, as I'm dressed like this. It is a steampunk book. It's really like a neo-Victorian dystopia. And so I think it shows the world, and it shows the three main characters and their relationship, the dynamic between them. So there's Lore and Gideon and Fallon. And now they're best friends. They've grown up together. They're aristocrats. Fallon is the ward to the emperor. He's the heir to the throne. Gideon and Lore have been betrothed to each other since they were 2 years old. And the three of them are best friends. So, can everyone hear me okay? Just to make sure. I don't want to be reading this if you can't hear me that well. Right, and I'm going to take my glove off just so I can turn the pages. Okay. He pretended to sleep as she crept up on him from behind. Whenever she decided to pounce, though, he'd unfailingly wake up and seize her. But this was always the best part of their game. Lore clutched her imaginary sword and made her attack. Fallon grabbed her, and they tumbled off his fake throne and onto the floor. "Fallon, you're dead," she said, wriggling away from him a little quicker than normal. At 12 years old, her body had started to change. When it came to spending time with her two best friends, she could no longer roughhouse or take a ball to the chest without the two little lumps that had begun to swell there, aching in protest. "Am not. I woke up and caught you in the act." He pulled her closer. He had also been changing, but in a good way. His already husky voice had deepened, and his body grew taller and broader. He looked more like a man every day. Ironically, more like his guardian, Lord Percival Berkeley, the current emperor of Vitruvia. He took a strand of her dark tresses and swirled it around on his face. They lay on the floor of his private dorm, catching their breaths, their heads close, and everything surrounding them white. The rooms at Chursley Bartlett Academy were as formal as those in her parents' estate, but uniform in the pure, unmarred hue, like the innocence they contained. From his elevated and protective quarters high next to the cathedral, they could hear the choir practicing, the voices echoing through the halls like so many seraphim. During languid Saturday mornings, when they were allowed to pass the time as they preferred, Lore deactivated her Orbis Capits and left them to toddle around on her desk. Her thoughts were free and clear. On cue, Gideon busted into the room, air guns blazing, his blonde hair hanging in his eyes, and a triumphant grin in place. "And now you're both dead." He joined them on the floor. "I always catch you two like this," he said, no suspicion in his voice. Lore imagined there should be. After all, she'd been promised to him, hadn't she? She considered them now as they sat beside each other, so drastically opposite in their looks and personalities. Gideon's hair shimmered like spun gold, and his elegant features flushed with rosy innocence. His crisp eyes, perpetually full of humor and positivity, seemed to reflect a cloudless canopy of sky. Fallon emanated darkness and shadow, both in looks and attitude. He had a wry humor, a biting wit, and often appeared moody and brooding, and yet Lore found herself gravitating toward him. Gideon should have been jealous of her obvious preference for Fallon, but maybe the thought hadn't entered his mind because they'd all been friends for so long, or maybe it was simply because she had no choice or say in the matter. She had to marry him. It had been agreed upon by their parents when they were 2 years old and decreed by the Treevale's bishop. "Anyway," Gideon continued, "don't you think we're getting too old to play Rebellion?" Rebellion, a game made up 6 years ago in lower school, had become their favorite weekend morning activity. The mention of this childhood frivolity roused thoughts of her grandmother, Lady Mathilde de Bellerive, and the one St. Lucian's Day only months ago when Mathilde had been allowed to visit, supervised, of course, by someone from the special place where they send batty aristocrats. Some supreme scandal surrounded her grandmother's life, Lore could tell. Her mother, Miranda, who couldn't stop talking under normal circumstances, clammed up like a mollusk when Lore tried to ask questions about why the old woman lived in a nursing home and not with them. On this holiday, while a sour-faced servant cut the dime cake, Lore prayed for a moment alone with her grandmother. The latter sat demurely, and her white curls shone like a soft halo of lamb's wool around the creviced plane of her face. It saddened Laura that Mathilde looked so much older than her 62 years. Everything about her screamed that she'd been leading a life of pain. Every part of her seemed stretched and frowning. Yet Laura saw that her grandmother wasn't insane like her parents and others wanted her to believe. There remained a discerning spark behind those soft doe eyes, eyes that Laura had inherited despite her mother's cheery cornflower blue. They sat next to each other on a curved velveteen chaise as elegant and uncomfortable as the other furnishings in the Featherston home, full of deep mahogany and heavy ornamentation. She began to notice that while Mathilde hadn't spoken during her visit, she now surreptitiously looked at Laura and then at the lit candlesticks in their brass holders on the coffee table. The girl understood. She was imploring. Great Lucian Lorelei! Her mother managed to take the holiday's namesake in vain while cursing at her daughter for starting a small house fire. During the commotion that ensued, Laura ushered her grandmother into her broom closet underneath the stairs, now trampled by servants rushing to help. She reached for the light. "No, darling, no lights," Mathilde whispered, her voice still carrying that affected lilt of the upper class. "Grandmother, why won't they ever let me see you?" Mathilde let out a bitter laugh. "Because they know I'll tell you things they'd rather you not know." "What things?" Laura whispered, leaning in. The closet door swung open and a plump arm reached in and turned on the light, exposing them. Constance, her mother's young maid, stood with her hands on her wide hips, glowering at them in smug triumph. Before Laura could plead with her to be quiet, she gave a robust, "Madam, look who I've found sneaking around." And the instant before her parents arrived on the scene, Mathilde slipped something into Laura's hand. Laura closed her fingers tightly around it and watched her grandmother transform back into a dumb mute. "What the devil do you think you're doing?" Her father removed his monocle so that his brow could furrow without inconvenience. He took her roughly by the arm. "I only wanted to keep grandmother safe from the fire." She gave what seemed like a logical defense, but he didn't bite. "Go upstairs to your room and there will be no dime cake," he hissed. "But father, that will be quite enough from you." His menacing glare implied harsh ramifications if she disobeyed. He may even send her away to the place no one spoke of, where they treated young girls who suffered from malcontent. Her best friend Sawyer had been sent there a few times, and she always returned quietly submissive, at least for a little while. However, Sawyer had a much higher tolerance for any kind of pain or discipline, especially since she refused to mend her ways. In this moment, Laura decided against headstrong behavior. Her mother looked on with faux rage, peppered with histrionics that could give the most celebrated actresses of the age a run for their money. Constance stood behind Miranda, her thick livery lips with their light fringe of a mustache still in a victorious sneer. The other servants haunted the background, all taking satisfaction in their power over her. Laura wished for a second that they were porcelain Galateans, even though she feared such creatures. But they were no longer allowed within the aristocracy. The lovely soulless servants, once a programmable race of automata, now remained a coveted privilege of the emperor and his head bishop. Those salvaged after the violence of the Great Rebellion 30 years ago were rumored to be kept locked away in a secret room deep within the seat. There they stood in the dark, like a silent army waiting for someone to reanimate them. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, keeping her eyes on Mathilde, certain she would never see her again. The old woman locked eyes with her, and before Laura passed out of sight, winked. Only when she had closed her bedroom door did Laura open her hand to see what treasure Mathilde had given her. A small key of darkened brass rested in her palm. As she wondered at the object, she heard her own door being locked from the outside, father's mild form of punishment. She didn't need to guess who was doing it either, since Constance's heavy breathing permeated walls. But even locked inside her room, she still knew more freedom than her jailer. Her orbis capits animated and whizzed around her head. The tiny Yocto creatures, a fat chinchilla riding in a miniature hot air balloon, and 2 flying squirrels, had been gifts from Miranda when Laura first went away to school. They swarmed her with cheer when she returned from classes, hovering around her head, spewing out phrases in her mother's voice that were both reactionary and linked to Miranda's own emotional state. "How could you be so deceptive, you impertinent little twit?" screeched Lord Izzyholt Hempel from his balloon, his little top hat shaking so much it nearly fell off. "Oh, shut up already." She couldn't take solace in them in her punishment. Instead, she sat and stewed about how she had always resisted any kind of closeness with her mother, preferring her father's stoicism above Miranda's erratic moods. She wondered why her father, seemed even more distant from her lately. Was it because she'd started becoming a woman, or perhaps he sensed the newfound contempt she held for his shallow position? Instead of dwelling on such negative thoughts, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and shifted some decorative papers. Underneath them, the tattered edge of her notebook peeked out. As with most everything, documenting this occasion proved to be her only release. Now, as Gideon spoke of their game, Laura couldn't imagine what it would be like to be a servant, or worse, one of the dregs. Hailing from the Tree Vale, a lush area in the northeast, she had more rights than others, and she'd been given an education, albeit most of it focused on the domestic arts. But in the granary and the turbine, children started working as early as 4 years old. She knew that from Fallon. Apparently, that's where Lord Berkeley found the handsome little boy and rescued him from a dire situation. No one knew what had happened to him, save for the strange scar that wound its way around his wrist like a snake. And he certainly never spoke about it, if he even remembered. But by his response to Gideon's question, he most certainly did. He looked away from them, his flashing eyes resting on that pale ring of skin. We'll never outgrow this game. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too long, and I didn't lose too many people. Oh, all right. Well, so again, the book is available on Amazon in Kindle and print. I will put the links in the comments after we're done here. And now, I just one more time want to go over the rules if you are participating in the steampunk costume contest that's a part of this. So if you are, you can DM me a picture of yourself in your best steampunk attire right after this is over. You'll have an hour to submit it. Your face has to be viewable in it. There can't be any full masks, so I have to be able to see that it's you. And I will post the pictures in the discussion, and I'll post the winners later on. Just a reminder what you will win. First place winner receives a $50 Amazon gift card. Second place winner receives this adorable set of vintage typewriter coasters that I want to keep myself, but that's what second place winner receives. And then third place winner receives this pretty little retro green colored journal. And that's it. And so now I will open up for Q&A if anyone has any questions. Whoa. This hat is hot. I'm getting hot in this hat, I have to say. Questions. Let's see if I can read them. Oh, Emily, of course you're dressed up. Where did I find inspiration for the character Fallon? That's a great question, Lorenzo. Fallon he's one of my favorite characters. He's such a kind of dreamy, dark hero. And, as I said before, all through school, I was obsessed with classics like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice. And when I think of Fallon and when I was writing Fallon, I was really imagining the, Mr. Darcy, Mr. Rochester, Heathcliff, those kind of dark, brooding heroes that they seem like assholes, but they're really not. Well, kind of Heathcliff kind of was, but Mr. Darcy, he's my ultimate. I think he's every girl's ultimate who loves classic literature. Yeah, so that's sort of where that's kind of the inspiration for Fallon was really kind of those dark, witty kind of heroes. What do I enjoy most about writing? And what did it feel like to revise the story after the original publishing? Those are two great questions. What did it feel like to revise? I guess with the first version that I put out, I felt like I was happy with it. But as a writer, you're never really happy with your own work. I have to say, you start thinking about it again, and you look back at it, and sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, who wrote this? And so I felt like since it had been 5 years, and if I was really going to move forward with the trilogy, that I should re-release a better version of the first book. And that's what I really think this is. I love the added parts. For myself, I added a little more dialogue and a little more scenes between Laura and Fallon, and I loved their dynamic, and so I'm really happy with the way this turned out. That's really the beauty of being an indie author, is you can go back and revise your work and republish it, and it's not really a big lift. What do I love most about being a writer? I love the freedom to create whatever I want to create. I've always loved writing. I grew up, I was a tiny child with asthma growing up. I was kind of a shut-in, to be honest. I lived on a street with all elderly people, and I didn't really have a ton of friends. So I grew up just reading and drawing and making up stories, and writing has come to be something, it's like a way for me to explain the world to myself. And if there's something in society that I don't like or I don't understand, I feel like writing something along that theme, it helps me deal with it myself. And the other part of it is what it can give to other people. Like, I'm very glad that people can be entertained by my writing, but I think in general, the beauty of storytelling is that someone can read the same thing you read and come away with something totally different, and I'm not writing really to give lessons to people. I'm writing, these books are like my lessons to myself, and if someone else can read them and learn something completely different, then I think that's a really great thing, and I think that is so powerful. And people, some people will say that writing is a secondhand experience, and reading is an even more removed, like third-hand experience, but I couldn't disagree with that more. Reading is so important because it teaches us empathy. It really does, and I think there's a transformative power in stories that stay with you through your life. And I mean, if reading and if books and if words didn't have power, then ignorant people wouldn't be burning them. So that's what I love about writing. I love the power of the story and the fact that it can be anything to anyone. Were there questions that I missed? Oh, the next books in the trilogy. That's interesting. The next books in the trilogy, well, without ruining any of the plot, so the world right now in Vitruvia is obviously very isolated and closed off. Borders have been put up, not like walls, but more technological advances like when I say Yocto creatures and I use that word Yocto, that's something I made up. That's like what's smaller than a nanoparticle is a Yocto, and I just imagine technology, like, even if part of it regressed back, or at least the aesthetic regressed back to Victorian times, there would be like sort of additional technology, and so they use Yocto steam to power things, which is like these little mites that interact and cause friction and push things into motion, and so their borders are like kind of like energy fields in that way. So they have been closed off really from the rest of the world, aside from very few like trade partners that were kept. And so in the next book, the world, it's called The Awakening, because the world is going to open back up to this country, and you're going to see what happens from there. And you're going to see what the rest of the world looks like in 2282. Ursula. How did you come up with the character Ursula? So Ursula, she is another one of them. I love her character, and she's a very kind of controversial character because you don't know whether you want to like her or hate her. She's sort of a villain, but I don't want to give too much away. There are things about her definitely to admire. She's a survivor. That's what I say about her character. And when I was writing her, I was thinking, and I know Emily, you'll appreciate this. I was thinking if Becky Sharp from Vanity Fair and Velma Kelly from Chicago had a baby, it would be Ursula. She just is one of those people who she will always land on her feet no matter what is thrown at her in life. Let's see what else. Why did you decide to set this story in a speculative steampunk setting? Yes. I decided to set this in a steampunk setting, so I knew I wanted to do, I had the story in my head. There was always the idea of the, Victorian throwback. And so the steampunk setting made sense because steampunk itself, and I have a whole blog on this. I talked to my friend Kim Burke, who is an expert. She did her thesis in steampunk. Steampunk is, you know, it can be many things to many people, but I guess it's very much like an aesthetic. So it can permeate literature, fashion, music, all of these things. The aesthetic itself is really, it touches on that kind of Victorian, kind of gaslight London culture, but it's also about making. It's also about taking something. That's why it has a little kind of industrial grit to it. It's about taking something that exists and kind of tweaking it to make it more functional, but in that sort of old-timey way. And it's really about kind of function. And, you know, I thought the aesthetic made sense for this world, but it's also quite, it's also a parallel because this world isn't a world of function. It's a world where things are very much repressed. So it's sort of an interesting dynamic to have that sort of progressive steampunk aesthetic, but to also be in this world that's really repressed. I just thought it was interesting. And of course, anything to be Victorian throwback. You know, it's funny because it depends where you are in the novel. There's the neo-Victorian part, which is very much Vitruvia, very much how I'm dressed. You know, women are in corsets and in high collars and bustles. But then, you know, in the area that is New York, which is still called New York in the book, where Laura and Fallon and Gideon go to private school, it's very much a looser culture there because it is sort of still a hub of, you know, industrial commerce. And it's New York, it's still New York, so they're allowed to be a little freer with their dress, and that's kind of more evocative of that kind of Edwardian or Great Gatsby kind of flapper aesthetic. And then when you go to Hopespoke, which is the bordering country, which is actually, it's where, like, Hopespoke is Texas. Ironically, the way the United States separated during years before, when there was turmoil and famine and strife of all kinds, Texas seceded and became this country, which ended up becoming a very kind of liberal place. And the fashion there is much more, you know, kind of Edwardian 1930s. They're wearing, you know, little Homburg hats and little kind of eyelet collars and A-line skirts and T-strap heels. So, yeah, I just thought that, I just like all that stuff, so I put it in a book. When did you first learn about steampunk? Yeah, so I first learned about steampunk. I kind of always knew what steampunk was, just because I was, you know, a fan of a lot of steampunk is very kind of neo-Victorian inspired. So I always knew what it was. But when I started writing this book, of course, I researched and researched and researched. Is this book good for book clubs? Yes, it's absolutely good for book clubs. And I already have, you know, when the first version came out, I went and visited a lovely book club, a lovely group of ladies near where I live. It's totally perfect for book clubs, and there are now book club questions in the back. And, you know, if you are doing a book club or want to do a book club, I'm happy to Zoom and speak and do a virtual Q&A with your members. All right, any more questions? All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I will just say one more time, thank you for coming. The book is available on Amazon. I will put the link in the comments. I will put the link in the discussion. Don't forget to partake in the costume contest and DM me your picture with your face showing. And also, oh, let's see, there's another question. Would you ever consider writing Laura's book of story? Oh, yes. Writing Laura's book of stories of the other woman as a standalone book. Yes. So just a little bit of context. Emily has read the book, so she knows a little bit about it, the inner workings. So I said that Laura, the main character, she has a real passion and a talent for writing, and she starts, during the book, she starts recording stories of women she's meeting throughout the book because they all have very interesting pasts, and she starts compiling this other book of stories. And yes, I absolutely would write those stories as a standalone book. I think that's something I do, you know, I kind of have had in the back of my head, because when I'm a big fan of the book The Help. Do you remember that book? I loved that book, but what I really wanted from that book was that book of stories she was writing. So I think I probably will do it. What music manifests steampunk? There are a lot of different bands. My favorite steampunk band is Emperor Norton's Stationary Marching Band. You should look them up. They're really cool. I actually saw them live once. I'm ordering a copy of the new version. Oh, thank you so much. So yes, back to the book, and it's available on Amazon. It's super helpful to indie authors if people buy it. It's super helpful if you leave reviews. And it's also helpful if you tell people about it if you like it and spread the word. Another thing you can do if you want to support me, I have a street team now, and you can look that up on Facebook. It's Ellis Kilroy's Street Team is the group, and anyone can ask to join. And it's really like a word of mouth thing, so I'll be putting social posts and things in there that are shareable that you can share out publicly, content, this and that. And members of my street team will be treated as sort of special ambassadors. You'll be given like, I'll give you special content and sneak peeks at things as I'm working on book 2. Anything to just sort of show my appreciation. I loved the clothes that make you. Oh, thank you so much. Is the reading level appropriate for young adults? It is good for holiday gift giving. Now, young adults, that's a good question. So there is some, like, later in the book, like in parts 2 and parts 3, there is some, like, dark violence. There's some sexual violence, and just some regular old violence. But it's never really graphic. I know that a 12-year-old a friend's niece read the book and really enjoyed it, and she was 12 and she felt like it was totally fine for her. But I would honestly recommend that maybe parents screen it before they give it to someone that young. All right, these questions have been so great. So thanks so much. I guess we're done. I'm hoping I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did. I had kind of little notes here. I was cheating and looking at them to make sure that I didn't. But I think we're good. So thank you so much for coming and supporting me. I really appreciate it. If you read the book, I hope you enjoy it. If you do, leave a review. And I guess that's it. Thank you so much. I'm going to have another sip of my drink here. Thank you. Oh, that's really strong. Did anyone make this? It's really strong. Don't have it on an empty stomach. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.